Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw the opening of Jurassic World Dominion getting close to $400 million in its opening weekend worldwide. So very impressive numbers there, though we do have to remember and remind ourselves that $52 million of that is coming from the CCP, which means that 75% of that $52 million is going to fund the Communist Party of China, and that is, I think, always something that is worth pointing out. So I'll just mention that right at the top of the video. Whereas Top Gun Maverick, which did not have a CCP release, is soaring to, as it says here, $747 million, close to $750 million after only 3 weeks of release. This film is doing insanely well. It has the potential now, I would say, I think many people probably will start to talk about this, to even maybe push itself to $1 billion based on the fact that it's had almost record-breaking holds from week to week, especially after that first week drop, which only saw it in around the 30s between week 1 and week 2. And when you add that in with the international drop, which has always been very strong too, continuing to be hovering in the 30s and 40s as well, this movie is doing very well domestically, doing very well internationally, doing a lot better domestically. We have to, of course, point that out. But still, nonetheless, these are very impressive numbers for a film that I don't think a lot of people suspected to be this kind of a hit. I think people expected it to make its money back, to make some profit. I don't think a lot of people were expecting it to be as massive of a hit as it is right now, and word of mouth absolutely has been the major factor for this film to be doing as well as it is doing. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about some other movies, do some comparisons between Jurassic World and the rest of its franchise, the World franchise, and also we'll be talking about Top Gun Maverick in comparison to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, as there are some interesting things going on right now when it comes to those domestic numbers and those domestic totals. So before we get going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, not that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So, Jurassic World Dominion, as you can see, $389 million worldwide, Maverick at $747 million. And what's interesting about this article, I've just finished my box office breakdown video for the Geeks and Gamers channel, was that this author right here, Nancy Tartaglione, who I'm probably mispronouncing and don't care all that much about it, but it's interesting because they are trying to break jokes throughout the entirety of the article, which I found to be a little bit silly. As you can see right here, Jurassic World Dominion puts its dino print into an additional $57 million, 57 overseas markets, and then also goes to talk about how the domestic bow, when added with the international numbers, which is now up to 245.8, that the global tally has reached a toothy 389.1. And then they go on to make a joke about Top Gun Maverick, saying it's a rather fitting 747 because that's the name of a plane. Yay, good on you, Deadline. But anyway, these are still impressive numbers for both of these films, the $389.1 million for Jurassic World Dominion, meaning the film is going to easily cross $400 million by the end of this week, probably well before next weekend as well, since this film will probably have some pretty strong weekday showings as we are entering very much into the summer season. Many people have already been off of school. Some people have been off of work, like teachers, for instance. A lot of college students have been off, and so we're starting to see these numbers get a little bit higher, which makes me happy because what it means, at least for me in my own area, is that it explains why I'm starting to see much earlier showtimes, where for the last couple years it's been very tough. Some theaters, even the closest theater to me, the earliest showtime that they would have usually would be around 4 p.m., which just sucked because whenever I would have a day off, I wouldn't be able to go see a movie because the earliest showtime would either be there at 4 p.m., which just doesn't work, or it would be at 1 p.m. at the theater that's a little further from me, which sometimes can work depending on the length of the film, but when I still have to pick up baby Thor from daycare, it does make things a little bit more difficult. But now we're starting to see pre-12 p.m. shows at both locations, and that makes me an incredibly happy moviegoer. So that's awesome, especially since there are tons of films that are set to come out, including some independent films too. And so that, of course, makes me very happy. As it says right here, though, talking about the international market, the Tom Cruise star had added another $52.7 million in 64 overseas markets, which does not include China, which is another drop of, it says right there, of 39%. So this film is consistently dropping in the 30s and 40s internationally and domestically after only 3 weeks of release. If these kinds of drops continue, and right now, these are drops happening in the midst of competition as well. I mean, $400 million from Jurassic World Dominion, that's nothing to shake your head at. That is a massive number. That is a very successful opening. So if this film is able to continue to have these holds because of the positive word of mouth, when much bigger films, or seemingly much bigger films like MCU films, for instance, maybe Thor Love and Thunder or a Lightyear, right, which is going to take a large portion of the younger audience, right, the family-going audience, probably going to bring their kids to the film, even though I mentioned this in a previous video. To me, I think Lightyear is going to appeal a lot more to older people, meaning people who are in their 20s and 30s, people who grew up with the Toy Story franchise, because I think more of them would be interested in the story that it's telling, even though I myself am not one of them, because this just seems like a blatant cash grab when you've already pushed the franchise well past its point. Not to say that any of the other films that we're talking about right here, whether it be a Jurassic World Dominion, is not also one too. Again, obviously it is, but I think that it is still worth noting nonetheless that we are looking at a situation where Top Gun Maverick has a lot of momentum, is holding strong in competition, means it likely will continue to hold strong in competition, and also, especially since Maverick is not going to have the same demographic as you would see for a Lightyear or other films set to come out in the next couple of weeks, means that this film probably has another 2 weeks of strong competition, and that's all this film would really need to push it close enough to where $1 billion becomes a foregone conclusion. We're not at that point yet, but it's looking very, very good for that to be a potential in the near future. If we actually look at the domestic numbers for the weekend, as you can see, Jurassic World Dominion topped the charts with $143.3 million, so that does not reach the number that was made by Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. However, if we look at the Law of Diminishing Returns, this is actually a very strong number for the third film in a franchise. Now, obviously, I know it's technically the sixth film in a franchise because these are connected to the Jurassic Park universe, especially in this film, more so than the others. However, the fact remains is that you normally see drop-offs, especially as franchises that are a bit long in the tooth, no pun intended. I should write for Deadline. Sorry about that. Anyway, that they would look at this film, you would look at this film and think, hey, this is actually a pretty strong hold from the previous movie. The previous movie opened to around $148 million when you adjust for inflation. So the fact that this film is not that much lower than where Fallen Kingdom was, especially since Fallen Kingdom was a significantly worse movie, I think should make the people at Universal pretty happy with this number, and I suspect that they will be able to easily pass $500 million by next weekend, and this film is looking to likely be in the same discussion as we're talking about Top Gun Maverick, being close to $1 billion film. This one, though, getting most of its love from the international market versus the domestic market, and of course, a lot of that has to do because of the CCP Communist China. As you can see, though, Top Gun Maverick coming in at number 2, making another $50 million, a 44% drop. So again, a 39% drop internationally, a 44% drop domestically after only 3 weeks. Another very interesting point, I mentioned this in my Geeks and Gamers video, and we'll do a fuller breakdown of this in just a second, but notice here that Maverick right now is at $393.3 million domestically according to this chart, whereas Doctor Strange 2, $397. There's 3 weeks of difference between these two films. So in 3 weeks, Maverick has been able to do what it took 6 weeks for Doctor Strange 2 to be able to do. So that means that the international market is clearly going more so for films like Doctor Strange, more so for films like Jurassic World Dominion, but the domestic market is going gaga for Top Gun Maverick. And it's not just that, it's also the fact that it is just, again, objectively speaking, a much better film. It is a much tighter narrative. It is not a perfect movie by any means, but I would say that if you were to ask most people, hey, which film would you rather buy on 4K? Which film would you rather see again? I imagine that you'd probably find most people saying Top Gun Maverick versus Doctor Strange 2 in the Multiverse of Madness. It's just my own guess there. As you can see, though, this film is still in a ton of screens. Disney has not taken this film out of any theaters, at least over the last week, so don't quite understand necessarily. I guess they were going to try and saturate the market as much as they possibly can with this movie to try and make as much money back as they possibly can, but the numbers are starting to run out. Again, it's at those many screens, and it's made only $4.8 million after 6 weeks. Again, this is not the worst number in the world, but it's definitely meaning it's running out of some room, so it's going to cross $400 million domestically. There's no question about that. It's already made another $20 million from last weekend, so there is still some room for this film, especially in the international market. So the chance of it getting to $950 is, I would say, pretty likely. Getting past that to $1 billion, it's still possible, but it's becoming less likely as every week goes by, and especially as more and more films start to come out, especially once Walt Disney starts to compete with itself with films like Lightyear expected to come out soon as well. Bob's Burgers coming in at number 4, $2.3 million, another 50% drop, no change there. Again, Disney holding all of their films for some reason in theaters. The Bad Guys from Universal make another $2.2 million. This film continues to make money, starting to lose out on some screens, but hey, Bad Guys has already done better than I think many people would have expected it to, and has already made its money back pretty easily and making some pretty massive profits to boot. Coming in at number 6 is Downton Abbey, A New Era, making another $1.6 million. This film is starting to be pulled from a lot of theaters. Film is definitely doing much better internationally than it is domestically. There is still a chance for this film to hit its break-even point. It is definitely close enough to where you could argue a 4K or Blu-ray release or some future release on a streaming service, etc. could make and could help this film get its money back. Could help Focus Features, etc., get their money back. But it is definitely a far cry from the first film, as it's still about half of what the first film was able to make at the box office. Looking at the number 7's film is Everything Everywhere All at Once from A24. Another very impressive hold there, 37% from last week after 12 weeks of release. Again, very impressive numbers from this little film from A24, and is now officially the highest grossing film from A24 as well. So kudos to A24 for that. And as I always mention, it is the superior multiverse film, though it is definitely not a perfect film. It is pretty darn good fun there. 12 weeks of release with the weirdest release schedule of all time. Hey, at least it worked out for them. I don't think it would work out for them in the long run with other films, though. It really comes down to the power of this specific film, how good the story is, and some of the actors involved that I think are driving people to go and want to go see this film and wanting to go see this film and demanding the theaters have it, versus some of the other films on this list. Firestarter, again, on a streaming service day-and-date release model. As you can see, it actually jumped up 720% from where it was last week, which is kind of insane to me and doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm wondering if this is an error on their part. I imagine that it would be. But as you can see here, it dropped out of 193 screens, and only 150 screens are left after 5 weeks. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 hanging out in the number 9 spot here, $710,000, a 58% drop there. So this film is now available on streaming services, I believe, or at the very least on video on demand services. And it will be released on physical media sometime in the fall. So obviously that's going to be taking some views away from it. But as you can see here, still making some money. Looks like $200 million domestically is probably out of the running for this film. But hey, it was very successful, did better than the first film, and I think that is worth talking about, even though I myself was not a big fan. And then lastly, coming out the last top 10, rounding out the top 10 is The Lost City, still hanging around, but as you can see, starting to lose out on theaters. But hey, it made its money back, which is something I did not think it was ever going to do. And again, that is much thanks to its international release, its delayed international release, $549,000 there. And then two of the films that came out last weekend, sorry about that. Two films that came out last week that are in interesting places nonetheless, Crimes of the Future and Watcher. Independent films, very small theater counts. As you can see here, I thought these were actually in their third week of release, but maybe I'm mistaken on that. But as you can see, not making a whole lot of money there. No budgets on these films, so can't say one way or the other if the film is successful or not. Jurassic World, as you can see from up here, $389.1 million, so doing very, very well. But just remember, keep in mind, this film did get $15+ million to the Communist Party of China. When we compare this film to the entirety of the Jurassic World franchise, as you can see right here, the first film, especially when these are all adjusted for inflation, Jurassic World is clearly the big winner here. But when you compare this to Fallen Kingdom, you'll notice that it actually has held itself pretty well. The opening day was actually higher than Fallen Kingdom, whereas the first Saturday was a little bit lower, and the first Sunday was a little bit lower as well. Right now, you're looking at Dominion at 143.3, whereas Fallen Kingdom in its opening weekend was at 148.9. And so even though it is a smaller number, it is not nearly as small as it could be in comparison. Again, law of diminishing returns here. So if these percentages hold out, not just domestically, but also internationally as well, then we could see this film get somewhere around $1 billion. Again, the first film made 1.8, second film 1.3. Would not surprise me for this film to make somewhere between $900 and $1.1 billion by the end of its run. We'll have to wait and see what that second weekend number is. We'll have to also see if this film does well in competition with others, but those are the numbers as they currently stand. Top Gun Maverick continues to wow audiences who go to see it. And me, as a box office person who loves to talk about numbers, $747 million, very impressive. But as I mentioned, if you look at that domestic number there, that is, I think, going to be kind of the constant theme here. As this film gets close to and will likely pass $400 million internationally, this film likely will probably pass $500 million by the end of its run in the domestic market, which makes me think it likely, or more likely, will get around $900 million or within the $900 million range. It might get willed to the point of $1 billion, but as I said, looking at the numbers as they currently stand, $1 billion is definitely in the running. It's a lot higher chance, I think, for this film to get $1 billion versus a film like Doctor Strange, but it is still doing well nonetheless. Almost $200+ million in net gain profits, and that is the big win for this film. Speaking of Doctor Strange, right now it's at $930.2 million, and when you compare these films, what's interesting is there's either a mistake in the reporting from the numbers in this location. So as you can see, these are comparing the two films. So even though Doctor Strange 2 had a much larger opening weekend, opening to 187 to 126 million. Remember that it had a holiday weekend, Top Gun Maverick did, and so therefore by that time it was 160 versus 201. So a $40 million difference. If we now compare those two numbers, this film now, Top Gun Maverick, is at 393.3, whereas this is saying 342.7. However, if you look to the actual page, it's saying 397.8. I'm pretty sure that this is the number of what it's supposed to be. So my guess is that there's been some error in their system. But if this does change, we'll talk about this at some point during the week. And so stay tuned for that. But regardless of it, even if it is at 397 and it is still technically ahead, we are looking at a situation here where this film is in a great position to easily surpass that of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And it's going to easily do that domestically. Internationally is a whole other story because Doctor Strange is just going to play a little bit better. This is kind of the nature of the beast. But the fact that this still is doing as well as it is domestically, and after 3 weeks is doing what it's taken, basically 9 weeks. In fact, you know what? Actually, scratch that, reverse it. My bad. So I made a mistake there. Doing it live. We're doing it live, everybody. Sorry. So at this point in its release, it had $342 million, Doctor Strange 2 did, whereas right now, it's $393. So as you can see, after 3 weeks of release, $393 versus after 6 weeks of release for Doctor Strange at $397. So that means that this film on its pace is going to easily surpass where Doctor Strange is right now and will easily, think about how many extra days this film has had over Top Gun Maverick. This film is going to make a killing in the domestic market. Sorry for that apology. I confused myself and then I was able to explain it to myself in the end. Fosberg is at $28.8 million. The Bad Guys at $225. Downton Abbey at $84 million. Again, he's $100 million to break even, so it's close, but not that much. $82.4 million for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Lost City at $187. Crimes of the Future at $2 million. No budget for this or for Watcher, so hard to say whether the film is a success. Still no budget for Men, but $8 million, definitely not a lot of money there. Firestarter at $14.1 million. Who knows if those numbers online are going to help or not. And Sonic the Hedgehog 2 at $397.6 million. Even though the film is definitely starting to run out of some room at the box office. Looking at the actual charting, because we like to do some charting here, let's go ahead and see if we can update this just a little bit to see if any of these numbers are a little different. Again, this is my own charting, and I did a slight update between the two videos. As you can see, though, that $389.1 million for Jurassic World Dominion puts the film right now at only negative $14 million. So that is very impressive. This film is going to break even sometime this week and is likely going to make a crap ton of money and be one of the largest grossing films of the summer of 2022. Top Gun Maverick at 747 has now made $193.2 million in net gain profits. Very impressive numbers for this film. Downton Abbey, as I had mentioned previously, $84 million, puts it at $9 million in the red. So could it still make its money back? Maybe. Starting to run out of room. International is the only thing that can save it at this point, and likely will get some of that money back in Blu-ray 4K sales and also in any of the digital releases it does in the future. Firestarter at $9.5 million. Again, not a massive loss for them, but definitely not a good number regardless of that. The $930.2 million for Doctor Strange 2 puts the film at $258.1 million in net gain profits. So even though the film is not going to likely get to $1 billion, and the chances of that are just decreasing every single day, the fact that this film will get close to $300 million in net gain profits is still incredibly impressive and is a massive gain for Disney, though I definitely think the Top Gun numbers are a lot more impressive because that was not seen as being as likely of a scenario to happen. And then there's some other numbers here as well if you have any interest in them. Obviously, everything over all at once at 82.4 million puts the profits at 11.9, which makes me quite happy, as it is, again, the superior multiverse film. What are y'all's thoughts about these? I know I was a little bit all over the place, especially when I confused myself when looking at the numbers comparison between Top Gun and Doctor Strange, but just in case there is still any confusion, once again, this was, the 342 is where it was by its third Sunday, whereas we'll see right now that Top Gun Maverick is on its third Sunday, which is why these numbers are different and why the number that I'm looking at right now for Doctor Strange is actually correct, because this is after 6 weeks, whereas for Maverick, this is after 3 weeks. So it's going to easily surpass that of Doctor Strange 2, which makes me quite happy. But what are y'all's thoughts about this? Are you happy that Jurassic World Dominion is doing as well as it is? Again, I don't think the film's all that great, to be perfectly honest. I'm glad that the franchise is done. I hope they don't continue it any further, just because I just don't really trust them at this point to be able to do anything good with it. Again, Fallen Kingdom was trash. Dominion was marginally better than Fallen Kingdom, but not all by that much, whereas Top Gun Maverick is just the film to go see, and if you have not seen it yet, I highly recommend it. Kind of surprised that Paramount is even taking it out of any theaters with that kind of per theater number, especially when you compare it to everything else. Maybe they're seeing something that I'm not. Maybe they're taking it out of specific theaters for specific reasons or prepping for another release. Who knows? Regardless, it's doing quite well, and so those are all the numbers as they currently stand. But let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, slap that fire button on Odyssey. Y'all all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to my June Keeper of the Bifrost and Chosen of Valhalla level members: Brandon, let's go Brandon, Christopher Bowman, Garrett Searles, Hymir Irie Hymason, Jeff Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Father Luca, Mike Jackson, for the win, Mad Mitch Dunaway, or in chat reviews. Make sure to check out his YouTube channel. He just hit 1,000 subscribers. Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel as well. Stan Andrian, Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel. And also, of course, the amazing Tina B, Empress of the Universe. Check out her YouTube channel, especially her show Soup to Nuts that she does with the amazing Stephanie B. Thank y'all very much for supporting me over on Patreon. And a huge shout out to all of my subscribers as well over on Subscribestar at these levels: Matt 317, Storm Tracker, the R, Fast Reaction, Mr. Roy, and also, of course, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. You guys are amazing. And a last shout out to my locals members. We have Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan. How about a hockey player? We have Mike Jackson for the win once again, Robert Barnes, and Brett D90. So I want to say thank you again for being my members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and the Chosen of Valhalla levels. If you want your name specially shouted out at the end of every single video and live stream, please check out my links at the Patreon and Subscribestar. You can find those in the top link in the video description, the Willow link, as I like to call it, where you can also get access to things like giveaways, things like the podcast I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger, and other cool stuff like that. Anyway, thank you all very much for supporting me for the month of June. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.